You're listening to The Bible Guys, a podcast where a couple of friends talk about the Bible in fun and practical ways.
You know, for those people watching, that Roland is so old that we're wearing headphones.
I was just thinking the exact same thing. I was going to say
really?
that. Yeah. Isn't that so funny? I wish we did wear headphones. I could hear you better.
Yeah, you know, nobody's really said that to me before.
Yeah.
I want to hear you better.
I want to hear you better.
I want to hear you more, Chris.
That's right. I just want to hang on every word, what you have to say.
Well, hey, good morning, everyone. Indeed, if it is morning. And we are going to start off with a segment called...
Good day.
Good day, sir.
Good day. Or evening.
Good afternoon.
Or night. Good night.
We are going to start off with a segment called Where Are Our Listeners From?
Yeah, this is a fun one.
Yeah, and so what we're doing is...
we've done Holland, Michigan.
Yeah.
And what else did we do?
We did, come on, Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, Minneapolis.
Minneapolis, yeah.
Okay, and this is another good one.
Yeah, and this is just because the Google stats came in, and it tells us that we have several listeners from a concentrated, from this area. And I don't know anybody who lives in this area currently.
Oh, yeah.
So, all right, so here it is. So we're going to give you clues, and you're going to see if you could sort of guess the city that we're describing.
These are such weird clues.
Number one, it was nearly named Possum Trot and Rabbitville in 1853 after two animals that were popular barbecue delicacies at the time.
Yeah. People eat possum
and rabbit?
Yeah.
Barbecue possum?
Barbecue possum, baby.
By the way, possums are really gentle creatures. They're ugly.
They're very sweet.
They're very sweet.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
so I had a pastor friend when I was growing up. So he was kind of one of my heroes, and he was a big hunter.
Yeah.
And I had possum at his house. He's from West Virginia.
Mm. Mm-hmm. All right.
Okay. Secondly, it's the birthplace of Mickey Mouse and Bomb Pops.
Well, those are random things.
Yes, I know.
But birthplace of Mickey Mouse is pretty...
That's a big deal.
Well,
Bomb Pop's a pretty big deal too, but...
Mickey Mouse is known all over the world.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Number three, it is said to have more fountains than any other city besides Rome. Holy cow. Leading to its nickname, City of Fountains.
Very creative nickname, by the way.
Right? Hey, by the way, wow.
Yeah. Neat.
Rome is a lot of fountains.
That's pretty cool, yeah. Did you get to see any fountains when you were in Rome?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Did you throw a coin in the Trevi fountain?
Of course.
Over your shoulder?
Of course.
Yeah, so Chad and I were standing there together, our executive pastor, and it was like 11:30 at night, and I said, hey, you're supposed to throw a coin over your shoulder. He goes, oh, okay. So we turn around and throw coins, and then some guy goes, oh, isn't that wonderful? You guys will come back, together someday. I'm like, I don't want to come back to Rome with Chad. Right.
He thought you were together, maybe, right?
Exactly. Okay. And it's the home to a football team that the Detroit Lions beat this year.
Ooh, that's a good clue.
And current Super Bowl champs.
Yeah. So if that doesn't give you a clue, it is Kansas City, Missouri.
There you go.
My future son-in-law, who's been dating my daughter for 5 years, just accepted a job in Kansas City, Missouri.
Wow.
So who knows? If they do get married, my daughter actually may be living in Kansas City, Missouri.
Yeah. Wow.
There you go.
So Kansas City right there. So is there a Kansas City, Kansas too?
Yes.
So it sits on the border?
It sits on the border, yeah.
And it splits right down the middle. But we're ignoring the Kansas City, Kansas.
Right.
And we are celebrating Kansas City, Missouri.
Well, I got to tell you.
So way to go, people.
I got to tell you, I almost wonder when he was down there, I almost wonder if maybe he was one of the ones listening to the podcast. That's how I came up.
Well, I think it's supposed to be like a groups. I don't know how she picked it, but cool. I doubt it. He doesn't listen to us.
I doubt it.
You know that.
Yeah, probably so. Probably not.
Yep. Okay. So, hey, do this. Comment and let us know where you're listening or watching from. And if you're listening on like a podcast platform, send it to us. info@BibleGuys.com.
Yeah.
Right?
Isn't it thebibleguys.com?
Thebibleguys.com.
Yeah.
info@thebibleguys.com. So, cool.
All right. Well, today we're jumping into actually this is sort of a transitional type passage, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we had mentioned that he was transitioning. As soon as he leaves Caesarea Philippi, his ministry changes. But now he's getting ready to leave Galilee and head towards Jerusalem. So really big transitional moment.
We're talking about Jesus, of course.
That's correct.
Yes.
Big fan, by the way.
Big fan.
Yeah.
Big fan.
Okay.
Jesus, big fan.
Yeah.
It reminds me of Kung Fu Panda. Did you see Kung Fu Panda?
Kung Fu Panda, yeah.
When he peeks in, he goes, big fan, big fan. Anyway.
Okay, here we go. We're going to read from Matthew chapter 19, verses 1 and 2, then Mark chapter 10, Luke chapter 9, and then we'll just keep going on Luke chapter 9. Here we go. It says, when Jesus had finished saying these things, he left Galilee and went down to the region of Judea, east of the Jordan River. Large crowds followed him there, and he healed their sick. Then it says in Mark 10, then Jesus left Capernaum and went down to the region of Judea and into the area east of the Jordan River. Once again, crowds gathered around him, and as usual, he was teaching them. Luke 9 says, as the time drew near for him to ascend to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem, right? And then in verse 52, it says, he sent messengers ahead to a Samaritan village to prepare for his arrival. But the people of the village did not come or welcome Jesus because he was on his way to Jerusalem. When James and John saw this, they said to Jesus, Lord, should we call down fire from heaven to burn them up? But Jesus turned and rebuked them, so they went on to another village.
So unbelievably random.
So funny,
It's
man.
so unbelievably random.
These guys nine of them couldn't cast out one demon, but man, bless God, they're going to call down fire from heaven.
Yeah. Well, Jesus had already said that when a town doesn't welcome you, he gave them instructions to do what?
Yeah, to shake off the dust off their feet.
Yeah, symbolically saying like shaking the dust off your feet, saying, "Hey, I've done what I can do. I'm shaking off the, this attitude of not being welcoming." Well, apparently they were so angry that they were not being welcomed, and that they wanted to. That they weren't content with shaking off the dust out of their feet. And so, just in case our listeners are wondering, for those who don't know, they're really they're referring to Elijah, aren't they? So,
yeah.
Elijah from the Old Testament is a famous prophet who called down fire from heaven and, burned up a sacrifice. And so I think what they were doing was they were sort of saying, who are they to not welcome Jesus?
Right.
Don't they know who he is?
Right.
Right. So don't you think it's attached to some sort of a, not just a punishment kind of attitude, right? But
I think it's just total road rage. I feel that way sometimes when I'm driving down.
Road
People
rage.
cut me off. I'm like, I called out fire from heaven.
That's so funny. Well, there's a part of me that thinks it's attached to punishment because they're mad.
Oh, yeah.
But then there's a part of me that thinks we'll show them, we'll get revenge of them in a supernatural way.
Right.
Display the wrath of God, like the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, right?
Yeah.
When the angels, when those little glowy things change faces, and all of a sudden they become the glowy things of death.
So they did grow up. Galilee isn't very far away from Mount Carmel, where Elijah did call down fire from heaven.
Yeah, that's right.
So you've been there? Have you been to Mount Carmel?
No, never been there.
So
I think we drove past it.
there's a statue
Look, kids.
on the top of the mountain. There's a monastery. It's a really beautiful monastery. There's a statue of Elijah, and he's standing there with a sword over his head, and he's got his foot on a guy's head. So yeah, It's pretty crazy. So Elijah won this great victory against the priests and prophets of Baal, and on Mount Carmel, and called down fire from heaven. Right. So that's the thing. But it's just hysterical to me because these guys. So they could not figure out how to cast out. 9 of them could not cast out one demon.
Right.
But they're going to call down fire, right? So there is something about that. Paul warns at one point that knowledge puffs us up, right? That we get really prideful. So there's kind of an adolescence in our Christian life.
Yeah.
So you're a baby at first. You're drinking milk and your spiritual parents are caring for you and loving on you and all those things. And it's just so wonderful. But then you've seen this. I know you have. I've seen it 1,000 times. Somebody starts really leaning into the word. They start studying. They get a hold of some systematic theology book. Mm-hmm. They heard some theologian that blows their minds. And next thing you know, they know everything. Everything.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And now they want to argue about every little detail. And your theology is wrong. And they've got it right. And everybody around them is a heretic. And that's exactly what I feel like is happening here, is they've been with Jesus just long enough. And they just left Caesarea Philippi. And he said the gates of hell will not prevail against us. Bless
Right.
God.
Bless
Right?
God, right?
Right. That's it. And it just seems like they're so cocky. And there is this moment, I think, in most big Bible students' lives where you get just a little too cocky. You think a little too much of yourself. And so I wonder if that's just not what's happening here.
Well,
Because Jesus' response, so it's interesting. Here it just says he turned and rebuked them. Some of the ancient manuscripts have this phrase on verses 55 and 56. It says, and he said, you don't realize what your hearts are like, for the Son of Man has not come to destroy people's lives, but to save them.
yeah.
Right? So they're so convinced Jesus is the Son of God that if somebody has a bad attitude about Jesus, we're going to wipe them out. And Jesus goes, you still don't understand the mission.
Right. You know,
Right?
you were talking about how knowledge puffs up and
Yeah.
giving those examples of people who, feel a little superior when they have Bible knowledge.
Yeah.
So I think we have a series coming up at our church that's coming up in the fall, where it's just 1 week that we're focusing on this, but we're actually focusing on the idea that that knowledge isn't the goal of the Christian faith. Right. Although more knowledge is always good.
More knowledge is important.
No, it's very important.
Yeah, but it's
right?
not the goal.
That's not the goal. The goal of the Christian faith is application. So the idea that I've heard this my entire life, where people will come and then they'll say like, "Hey, I've been going to your church a while, but there's always another church down the street that's giving more knowledge." Right. I mean, there just always is. Right. Because it depends on what kind of weekend you want to be a part of. I've been a part of pretty in-depth Bible studies. Where you meet together and man, it's a deep dive into some books, right?
Right.
And it's just straight up information. It's like, woo, feel like you're drinking from a fire hose. Well, there are actually churches who do that on Sunday mornings.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
And it's like, and there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. There's all different kinds of churches for all different kinds of people. Our friend Nick Boring drilled that into my head, right? So it's not better, it's just different.
Right.
But when people come to me and my whole life and they've said, hey, I just want more meat and potatoes and I want this or that, I always just sort of laugh and think to myself, I will bet you out of the 52 weeks, your past 52 weeks at our church, I bet you that you probably struggled with 45 of the messages in terms of application in your life.
Yeah. You didn't actually do all 50 messages.
No. Right. It's like
I want to hear more. What they mean is I want bigger words.
Yeah.
Would you please use more 4-syllable words? That's what they're saying. I want more meat and potatoes. I want it to be deeper.
I want to learn something new.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. I want to learn something new.
Yeah.
And they think, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with that because again,
Nothing wrong with wanting to learn.
Yeah. Learning is a great thing. But as long as we understand that the goal of every message, the goal of every time we sit down and read the Bible, the goal of every time we pray, the goal of every time we fellowship with other Christians, I use the word fellowship.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. Do you? The goal that every time we do that is the goal is application and transformation. So if we're not applying and growing and exercising our faith, then more knowledge is pretty fleeting.
When Heritage was younger and I had just come to Heritage, we were still meeting in high school, and I had a guy I really liked him a lot. And he kind of came after me one day going, I've heard your stories. I've heard you preach. I get what you're about. I just feel like I need more. I'm like, more what? He said, deeper Bible teaching. And I said, okay, I'll give it to you. He said, great. And I said, we can start meeting at 6:00 on Monday mornings. He goes, no, that doesn't work for me. I said, all right, I could do 6:00 on Wednesday. That doesn't work for me either. I think I'm available in the evenings on Thursdays. So, that's not available for me either. I offered him 4 time slots in the week.
Yeah.
He said it's not available. What he wanted was for the 35 minutes he's available on Sunday mornings.
Right.
He wants me to customize messages for him.
Right.
Right. So he wasn't that hungry.
Right.
It was just the one day a week he was going to eat spiritually. He wanted me to feed him a gourmet meal.
Right.
For that one meal.
Yeah.
Right. And I asked him, I said, can I ask you a question? I said, would you say that you spend 7 hours a week in the Word? And he went, oh, no. That's what I'm saying is I need to spend more time in the Word. I said, would you say you spent 5 hours a week in the Word? He goes, Oh, no, not even close. I was like, okay. So he wants me to set him on my lap, bounce him like a baby.
Right. Put him in a high chair.
Here comes a great big word. We're going to talk about sanctification this week.
Here come the carrots. Here come the carrots.
Right.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we can get a little selfish when we're talking about that. Now, I think it's incredibly important to be studying and learning. We should be students of the word. And 5 years from now, you should not even hardly recognize the person you used to be and the level of lack of knowledge you had back then versus now, right?
Sure.
5 years later.
Sure.
You should always be growing. But the goal in a Christian's life is not just to become a super student. You know, God has multiple purposes. He said we're supposed to love other people. We're supposed to love God. That's ministry and worship. We're supposed to go tell everybody. That's evangelism. Fellowship, we talked about that, right? Bringing people into the family of God. And discipleship. We should be discipling others, not just, he says, teach them to obey. So we're supposed to be discipling others. Those big 5 purposes, it's not just discipleship. It's all these things together make a disciple.
Right.
And so the goal is not just to learn more. The goal is to have balance in your life. And balanced things are healthy, and healthy things grow. Right. So you need to have balance in all of those areas. So you should have a hunger. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, right? You should have a hunger for God's words and, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these other things will be added to you. There's just a million of these phrases like that we should be seeking God. We should be seeking God's ways, and we discover him through his word. But then we need to be balanced in all the other areas. So anyways, I think it's funny. They get puffed up and they're going to call down fire from heaven. So far, the only thing we've seen is that they went around preaching a little bit, and they did some miracles.
Yeah.
But now they're ready to cast out or call down fire.
So these few verses from each gospel here. There's one from Matthew, Luke, Mark. Actually, those 3. I forgot to turn that off.
Your phone's ringing, Chris.
I can't believe that even happened. Sorry about that, listeners. So we have 3 of the 4 Gospels here. But again, that's why I called it a transitional type passage, because really what it's really saying is, he didn't want to go to Judea. His brothers ridiculed him. Remember last week we talked about that?
Yeah.
And he knew that once he entered into Judea, that there was no turning back.
Right.
And he was entering toward Jerusalem. He was entering toward the cross and the crucifixion. And he knew what was coming in Passover week, right? And so eventually he gets done and he starts heading that way. So can you even imagine, first of all, side note, that Jesus is marching down from northern Israel. Yeah. And he's going all the way down to Jerusalem. Now, it does say that he goes on the east side of the Jordan River. Yeah. Which means that we have a little map here in our Life Application Study Bible that talks about leaving Capernaum, and then he sort of goes down on the west side.
He goes through Samaria.
And then he crosses over and visits a city over on the east side,
which would be on modern day Jordan.
Day Jordan, yep. And then he crosses back over, and we're about to see later on that he goes to Jericho.
Right?
And then eventually ends up in Jerusalem. Yeah. But can you even imagine Jesus, making that final march, having being the only one with the perspective of like, do you have any idea what I'm doing for you?
Yeah.
Right. And you know what I feel like? There's a lesson in there. There's a sermon in there. And I think that there are a lot of times in our lives where we take for granted what Jesus has done for us.
Right.
Right. So every time that we sin, every time that we make selfish choices or, just decide to exercise our own will and even, we make a really sort of a big and a bad choice, in our lives. We often don't stop and reflect because Jesus would be thinking, do you have any idea? Do you have any appreciation of what's about to happen is what he's thinking?
Right.
And we would look back at the cross and say, do you have any idea what he paid for?
It said that Luke chapter 9:51 says Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem.
Yeah.
What a phrase, right?
I didn't even see that. Where's that at?
So 51, verse 51, Luke 9:51.
Oh yeah, resolutely. There it is. Yeah.
So his brothers are trying to get him to go for the Feast of Tabernacles.
Right.
And he goes, no, if I go down there now, there's going to be trouble.
Right.
But that's about 6 months out from Passover. So he's going to be the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. He is the Passover Lamb. Right. And so he couldn't go during this big festival. It was going to cause too much trouble. It's too many people, too much. Jerusalem's going to be too politically and religiously charged. So no, I'm not going to go. Well, now we're past that. So now he's moseying down. He's resolutely going, but there's a lot of things that happen between here and Jerusalem.
Right.
And so now he's going down through there. He cuts through Samaria, which, by the way, we've talked about this before, that the Jews hated the Samaritans because they were half-breeds, and the Samaritans hated the Jews because of prejudice. And so there's this prejudice back and forth, both of them unreasonable. But that's the way that they felt about each other. And so oftentimes Jews would walk around, good purebred Jews would walk around Samaria.
Yeah, they would add sometimes like an entire day's journey.
Yeah, because they didn't even want the dirt to be on their sandals from Samaria.
They considered them unclean.
Yeah. So it was just gross to them. Ooh, gross, right? But Jesus didn't have that same prejudice. And so there's multiple times he just cuts right through. It's most practical. I love that about Jesus, right? And so he's just cutting through Samaria.
And the people are valuable.
Yeah. And he stops in a town, and it's interesting, prejudice goes both ways. So here they're like, we don't want anything to do with you. You're a Jewish rabbi, whatever. We don't want you. Now, Matthew says that large crowds follow Jesus and he's healing their sick.
Right.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
What village doesn't need some sick people healed? But they didn't want anything to do with Jesus. And then it says, Mark says, once again, crowds gathered around him, and as usual, he was teaching them. Well, we know that several of the Samaritans were really amazed by his teaching. Right. So this village didn't want anything to do with Jesus. So even though he was currently healing and teaching, now get on out of here.
Well, and it gives the reason why. It said they did not welcome Jesus because he was on his way to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And so what's the implication of that, you think?
I think that they had their own temple. Right. So they had their own worship system, and they were feeling rejected culturally. By him, I think, and so they were rejecting him. Hence
the conversation with the woman at the well.
That's right.
Right, because they talked about, you Jews worship at your temple in Jerusalem. Where do we worship? Right. And that whole conversation took place. Yeah. So that was a really big thing in culture. So just thinking about here's the word about Jesus from all of the good Jews. I'm sure, well, not all, but many believed that he probably was the Messiah, even though that they wanted a military person, to deliver them, right? They interpreted deliverance, not spiritual deliverance, but they were in occupied territory and they wanted military deliverance. But either way, they're thinking Jesus is the answer, and then Jesus is on his way to the big worship, festival in the Passover feast in Jerusalem. And there was a absolute attitude toward him about that.
So I think sometimes we can wrap up with this, I think, but sometimes I think we guess that other people aren't going to like us. And so we preemptively strike, right? And this might've been it, is that, hey, if you're on your way to Jerusalem for some kind of worship thing, you're not going to like us anyways. So get out, right? So I think sometimes we push away people. We don't really know. We don't take the time to really know why they're here or what their intent is. We just reject them because we guess that they're going to reject us. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of woundedness in that. The woundedness is in the culture long term, but that's probably a big part of that. So
yeah. Well, that's great. That's a great place to end, and we will see you next time, hopefully on the Bible Guys.